Before we dive into anatomy and physiology, I want to talk about succeeding in A&P. And I'm making this video anticipating that at some point in the introduction process, I showed you this graphic or a graphic like it, where I was explaining to you that a lot of people are unsuccessful in anatomy and physiology. A lot of students drop, a lot of students make D's and F's, or a lot of students make grades that are so low that they have to repeat the course. Now, I hope that you understand that this is not ideal. Ideally, what I'd like to do is for everyone to come in, be successful in the course, and then go on and go through a program and get a great job and do well. That is what we are trying to do at any college. But there is a rigor that is going to go along with the coursework that you're taking, and we want to make sure that people can rise to that. And anatomy and physiology becomes the first difficult course of many to follow. So when you're looking at a graphic like this is not me just being like real hardcore with my students and only making sure that a certain percentage get through. It's not like that. It's that anatomy and physiology, anywhere that you take it in the United States, is going to be rigorous, and it's going to act as a filter for the people that are going to get through and get to those health allied and medical fields. So with that, let's talk about how you can be successful, how you can start making decisions right now to put yourself in a place where you are going to get the most out of your study and what you're doing, and so that you don't make some of the common mistakes that I see semester after semester. Let's begin by looking at time management, because I think time management probably has to be one of the biggest issues that unsuccessful students have. For many, college can be the first time that you have a lot of expectations on you, and those expectations can start weighing down on you. If you're looking at what your family expects of you and what work expects of you, and then every single little deadline that you have for school. But there's an easy way that you can keep track of all this. Just keep a planner. A planner of some type in college is going to be critical for your overall success. Now, I'm giving you an example of the type of planner that I used when I was in college and the type of planner that I use now. But you don't have to use paper ones like this. There's obviously apps that you can utilize. Even just having a piece of paper and writing down deadlines and, pinning it next to your desk or your work area is a form of this. But just having a plan of action is going to make an enormous difference in your overall success. Because what we're trying to do when we are training you through the college process is not just to balance your work expectations or your education expectations. It is overall, as a professional, how do you balance all things, your spiritual well-being, your sleep, your health, exercise, and medical issues and things like that. How do you balance all of that stuff and not lose your mind? Well, you have to start getting into these habits of writing down goals, making sure that you're making short-term goals, and that you're keeping everything in mind. So when you keep a planner like this, the planner that I keep does not just have work expectations. I also put in family expectations. So if my wife tells me at the beginning of the day, like I have to get something done, it goes into the planner. Or if I make plans with a friend to see them in a couple of weeks, it goes into the planner, because those things are as important as the goals that I make at work. Like if a promise to a friend is an extremely important thing, and so is a deadline at work. So all of those things should be going in. So think of the planner as planning your life in general, not just your education. And I make that suggestion because I really think that it will decrease stress. It'll help you to get things done on time. And overall, we see that proper time management makes students more successful. We see it in the grade book. Now, one of the great things about proper time management is that you can take very large goals that seem really lofty, and you can start breaking them down into smaller chunks. Now, what you're going to do in this anatomy and physiology class, maybe not in the first week or two, but later on down the road, it's going to seem like there's a lot of stuff being thrown at you. And students can very often get overwhelmed with this. So I'm going to give you the example of the skeleton. We're going to go through the skeleton. We're going to, like, pretty much every nook and cranny of each bone, you're going to have to know this huge Latin name for it. And when you get these lists at first, they're going to seem very daunting. So let's say, for example, I gave you 120 terms that you were going to have to know in a week. Well, if you tell any student that they have to memorize 120 things, especially things that are foreign to them, they're going to freak out a little bit, right? It's intimidating. But what is 120 divided by 7 days? It comes out to 17 and change. So could you memorize 17 things in a day? Probably. 17 things is not as daunting as 120 things, right? So you take the first 17 on Monday, then you take the second 17, then you take the third 17, and before you know it, after 7 days, you've done it. And that's the beauty of a planner, is that you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to have that big goal weighing on top of your head that, oh my God, I have to memorize the whole skeleton. All you have to do on Monday is just get that first 17. That's all you have to do. And then you can go to bed knowing you did it correctly as long as you stick with the plan. So this is the beauty of it. Take it from me, a chronic worrier. All right. Having a plan and sticking to that plan is one of the best ways to decrease anxiety and to get the most out of your study and work. And I think that a lot of people come into a course like this and they know that what they need to do is break things up. Maybe they weren't challenged in the past to have to do that and it wasn't necessary, but it starts becoming necessary. So now I think it is important that we talk about your motivation and procrastination. Why do people procrastinate? You know, like the graphic says here, are you procrastinating because you're demotivated? Or are you demotivated because you procrastinate, right? Maybe sometimes people are unsuccessful because they simply don't have a plan. Well, that's what I'm attempting to do with this video, is to help you develop a plan so that you feel empowered. But I can't do anything if you just don't care about this material. I'm making the assumption that people are coming into this class, they want to learn the information, and they are excited about becoming healthcare professionals. But if you're going through this content, you're like, this is boring, I hate it, I can't bring myself to study it, well, then we have to have a whole other conversation, which is maybe you're just misplaced, right? You can't force yourself to like this stuff, and you don't want to force yourself to go into a career that you just don't care about. And that's a good thing, right? Think of this as our first date, me representing the healthcare field that you're going into. If you just don't like it in the beginning, that's a good thing. You have learned in the beginning that it's a bad match, and you can move on to something else. So I just want to put that out there, that if you're going through this class and you're really seeming to hate it, compared to your classmates, if your classmates seem real motivated but you're not, give serious consideration to maybe you chose the wrong major, you know, and it's not a bad thing to change that major or to move on. But if the issue is just planning and kind of getting yourself motivated or getting your life in order, we can work on that. That's not a problem. So let's take a deep dive on cramming. Why do students cram? Why is it done? Well, one reason that it's done is because of just straight up procrastination. And of course, any large task, it's natural that human beings are going to procrastinate doing it. A lot of times those students perceive that they are saving time. They think that they have outsmarted the system somehow. So if I give you 3 weeks leading up to a test, I'm making the assumption that those 3 weeks are being utilized in a strategic way in order for you to succeed. And what a lot of students will do is they don't do anything for 2.5 weeks, and then maybe for 2 days. They study and they think they have somehow outsmarted me. Well, if they make the grade, I guess it worked, but I will tell you more often than not, it doesn't. I didn't make this video just to wag my finger at you and tell you, you should study, you should study, whatever. I mean, if you don't have to study and you're doing well, that's great. But I'm not making this video because I deal with that a lot. I'm making this video because I deal with a lot of people who have very unorganized skills. They've never had a challenging course. They don't know how to approach it. And when they just start cramming at the very end, coming up to a test, they scratch their head later and like, why is this not working? So you may perceive you're saving time, but you'd actually find that breaking study up into smaller chunks is going to save a lot more time, and it's going to be a lot more time effective. A lot of times it's done for just straight up lack of organization. If you've never had tasks like this that were asked of you, it's reasonable to assume that someone doesn't necessarily know how to go about doing it. That's fine. You're going to learn along the way in the college process. As I said before, it could be a lack of motivation. I know there are many of you who are forced to go into a certain major because maybe a family member or a friend told you it'd be a good way to make money, which, you know, maybe that could work out. But I think more often than not, there is something to be said for the fact that you have to major in something that you're at least mildly interested in. Okay, so notice that I didn't say major in something you love and you'll never work another day. You know, those are things that people said to me, and I wouldn't necessarily say that I love science. And here I am, a science teacher, a science professor. There's other things that I really love, but it seemed realistic to me. Like I had an interest in it, and I continue to have an interest in it, and that motivates me. So I do like learning. I do like learning about science, and it motivates me to do those tasks. But if you were to ask me to do something in business, for example, or like I took a politics class in college, I just had like zero motivation to get it done. I just don't care about those things. as much as I cared about science. I found science much more interesting. So you have to find something you're at least mildly interested in, and that should motivate you to want to succeed. Okay, but here's the big one. Why do students cram? Well, more often than not, it's because they took some easy cheesy classes in the past, and it rewarded them for doing so. So you took a class, it gave you 2 weeks, an exam was coming up, and then the night before, or maybe the day of, you just crammed a bunch of information and you made a high grade. And if you did that, good for you, because that I mean, why wouldn't you do that? Why would you take 2 weeks to study for something when it only took like an hour to cram the information? But understand that a lot of times when students do that, it's because they are taking some easy freshman level course that by design was made in such a way that it's just trying to ease a student into the college process. We don't want people coming into college and then immediately scaring them away with difficult courses. So at the freshman level, we make some easy classes where you just get some points for showing up, get some points for turning in homeworks and stuff like that. And we just don't want students leaving. We want to bring the challenges on slowly so the student feels like empowered that they can do it. But for many, this can create a false assumption that college is easy and I don't have to study at all. And then they get to a course like A&P, which for many is going to be the first major challenge that they have, and they start bombing exams and they blame the instructor, blame the course, blame the college, blame. But really, this is the process that eventually courses are going to start getting more challenging. So A&P is not the hardest class that you're ever going to take, but it is the first challenging course of many that most of you will take. All right, so I have decades of experience teaching anatomy and physiology, but I also have a lot of student evals that will tell me that the reason that students couldn't cram anymore is because there's just way too much information. All right, if you're going to have a bunch of things to learn as far as the anatomy, but also how those things work, the physiology, there's just so much information to learn. Your brain cannot physically stuff this stuff in. And so that's one of the reasons that cramming stops. Earlier, easy classes that students take at the freshman level or maybe in high school, where memorization of vocabulary and terminology is emphasized over showing an overall understanding. So just to give you an example, in this course, it's not enough to just memorize all the different parts of a skeletal muscle. You also have to know the overall process of how those things work together to cause contraction. So when you're studying for understanding, it's just a different type of study. You can't just stuff information in anymore. And cramming really just helps with memorization more so than understanding. Another reason students stop cramming out of necessity is because it increases stress. It's a game that students play with themselves where they get all hyped up the day before an exam and they just get extremely caffeinated and they get like 2 hours of sleep, and then they go in and take a test and they think that that's how the process works. And it's some type of fun game until you start having some health-related consequences as a result of that. You can't do that years after years. It's one thing to do that every once in a while in the college process, but you can't do that repeatedly. It will take a toll on your body, and it's not a fun way to live life. So planning for things and just spreading it out is really going to decrease the stress that you have. Another big thing that I see as semesters roll out is that the students that plan will generally tend to have a good buffer inside of their plan. So let's say that an exam is coming up and you've planned for 14 days of study. Well, within that 14 days, if you get a flat tire or if someone in your family gets sick or you have to take a pet to the veterinarian, it's not a big deal because you can plan around that. You can shift things within your planner. But people who cram generally tend to get all messed up when something like this happens. So I will hear things in my office where students will say, the reason that I failed this test is because my mom was sick the night before the exam. Now, if a student was utilizing all that time that they were given, someone getting sick the night before an exam should not make an enormous difference in overall grading, right? So this is less a lesson that I'm trying to give you relative to being a teacher and more a lesson of just a person my age kind of passing on wisdom to you, that when you encounter people in life who always seem to complain that everything happens to them, why is their life just such an uphill struggle? We all deal with issues, but some of us just handle them better. And part of handling life in general better is just having an overall plan. So something like a flat tire or an illness or something unexpected like that should not throw off everything and cause a domino effect of everything just falling apart. So if you have your life in order, if you have a plan, it shouldn't be as big a deal just to reorganize things so that everything is getting done. I get the question a lot when this class starts, and students will ask, how much time should I spend on this class per week? And I always struggle to answer that question because I think everyone is different. You have to put in as much study as is going to be necessary to commit these things to memory and to understand them. And I know that's an unsatisfactory answer, but that's just the reality. If I sit here right now and I tell you, you need to put in 4 hours every day, blah, 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 that's not realistic. It's just, some people are going to take a lot of time, some people are not. Generically, what I tell most students on day one is I would say put in a little less than an hour every day. And can that be done? Yes, it can be done. If you went over your notes from class for 30 minutes, and then you went over 20 minutes of the associated reading chapter, that's 50 good, solid minutes of study. You want to study in smaller chunks because this is how your brain operates. You just don't physically have the capacity to study for 4 or 5 hours at a time. It may seem like you can, but how much of that are you actually absorbing and how much of that is actually sticking? So let me show you, for example. Let's look at 2 people who studied 5 hours out of the week. And one person did 1 hour of A&P study for 5 days a week. They got 5 hours of study. And one person did 5 hours of cramming on Sunday night or something. Right? Who's getting the most out of it? Mathematically, both of these people did 5 hours of study. But the reality is that the person who spread it out is going to retain a lot more of that information. And also remember, this person slept 4 times in between that, so they had time to kind of stew on the information, to let it ruminate and sit before they started taking on more information. So this is an important aspect of how your brain operates, is that you have to spread things out and take it in somewhat slowly so that everything can kind of come together. Because this person that's trying to do 5 hours of poor study, they probably got 1 good hour in at the beginning, and then the next 4 hours was just wasted time. They were just spinning their wheels. Let me give you another tip relative to getting some good quality study. You want to get in the habit with difficult courses like this one of diversifying your study. So what I mean is I have a lot of students that when a test is coming up, their version of study is to just look at their notes 1,000 times and then just hope that whatever's in their notes clicks. They just kind of memorize what they wrote down. Well, then that begs the question, did they actually learn or did they just memorize a bunch of stuff in their notes? And what if their notes were written incorrectly? You know, that's another issue. So what you would want to do rather is to diversify your study in such a way that you're receiving the same information in different ways. So for example, let's take one of my lessons. Let's say that you see the lesson live because I'm teaching it in class, or you watch a video. It kind of depends on how you're receiving this class, all right? Maybe that's the first way you receive the information. Then you look at the printed notes or PowerPoints that I supply. That's a second way of getting the information. Then you go to the book and you read the same information to try and put it all together. That's a third way. And then anything that may seem difficult, you use YouTube, Wikipedia, you Google it or something like that. That's a fourth way. Now, someone who goes through these 4 ways of receiving the information is inevitably going to have a better understanding than the person that just stared at their notes again and again and again. It's very boring to just sit there and stare at your notes over and over and over again. You don't want to do that for years. You want to get in this habit of kind of seeking the same information in a different way, because it's going to start filling in holes and you're going to start seeing things repeated that are important, and things just stick a lot better. All right, one of the important things with complex courses is that you have to study for comprehension, not memorization. So what memorizers are wanting is they are hoping that they are going to recognize keywords. It's a game that they play. So let's say, for example, I'm teaching you about mitochondria. The student memorizes that mitochondria have something to do with ATP. Then they go to the test and they're just looking for those keywords. If they see mitochondria, they look for ATP. Or if it's reversed, if they see ATP, they look for mitochondria. Do they understand what mitochondria do? Probably not. Do they understand the role of ATP? Probably not. So this becomes a game where the student hasn't learned anything. They're just doing a word association game. And we don't want to reward that. We want people going onto the health allied field to actually understand how the human body works. Now, if you study for comprehension, it will drive memorization. If you study in such a way that you're just trying to understand something, the names of things and parts will naturally start coming together. I want to highly encourage you all to create a study ritual. So if you sit down and study at the same time, in the same place, in the same way, in the same clothes, etc., it starts creating a habit, and habits are the things that kind of lead to inevitable change. So that includes the location of where you're studying, the lighting, the temperature level, the noise level. Be aware of your surroundings. If you're trying to study in such a way that the kids are making a lot of noise or someone is blasting music nearby, you are decreasing the effectiveness of what you're doing. And that's what I'm all about. I'm about, I want to do the least amount of work, but I want to get the most out of it. And so if people are playing music or they're making a lot of noise, or if there's light distractions or something like that, you're not being effective with your time. You're spinning your wheels for nothing. Nobody wants to do that. All right, lastly, let's just look at approaching the book. I always get these questions about the book. How are we going to use the book? What are we going to do with the book? I'll tell you the way that I use the book is, this course is complicated. It's normal if you go through one of my lessons and you don't 100% understand anything. So the understanding is that you're going to go through and you're going to read the same information in the book, and hopefully things will start clicking. Now, this goes along with what I was talking about as far as diversifying your learning process. It's expected that you're going to get information from my lectures, then you're going to do some active reading process, and then some form of reflection. Reflection would be like study, so going over note cards, going through your own written notes, doing the exercises that I'm going to create for you as far as review. And what you're doing here is you're triangulating everything. So it's not enough just to go through in one of these ways. It really takes all three of them to get the overall understanding that we are expecting. All right, so I want you to read strategically. So what does that mean? That means that you can't just read like this, okay? This is how we read novels. We can read novels like this because novels keep us engaged. There's some type of narrative, and they become page turners. And textbooks are not written to be page turners. They are written to be thorough. They are written to be exacting, and they do not care if you turn the page. All right, they're just making sure that they got the correct information. So how do you read something like that? Well, you have to approach it just like you would a classroom. If you were sitting in my classroom watching my lessons, what would you do? You would take out a sheet of paper, you would take notes, you would keep yourself engaged. You have to do the same thing when it comes to the reading process. Just as you would in a classroom, you have to sit up in a comfortable chair, you have to make sure that you're in a well-lit area, and you have to make sure that there aren't any distractions so you can give it your full attention. Just as you would if you were in my class. You can't just sit there and absorb the information. You have to be an active participant. So that might mean taking notes, highlighting, tabbing, writing a summary after you wrote up something that was complicated. What a lot of my students do is they'll take notes from the book, then they'll take notes from class, and they'll create a third set of notes that kind of combines everything. And it's the process of making the third set of notes that is study. But the point is, to get the most out of reading, do something to be an active participant. And one of the big tips that I always tell students is start at the back of the chapter. I really think that that's the best thing to do. Go to the back of the chapter, read the summary of what it is trying to get you to take away, then go to the beginning, and you'll have a better idea of what you're trying to take away. This is not like a novel where you're going to be giving away big secrets, like what Voldemort's up to or what's going to attack Harry next. You don't have to worry about that stuff with a textbook. Go to the back of the book, read what it is that you are supposed to be taking away, then start reading through and doing your highlighting or note-taking or whatever it is, and you have a better idea of what you're supposed to be taking notes on and what you're supposed to be taking away.